The morning sun had barely risen when Thomas Williams opened his eyes. He'd been awake for hours already, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Today was the day he'd been waiting for since his son was born 18 years ago. Today, his boy was graduating from high school. Thomas sat up slowly, careful not to wake his wife sleeping beside him. His body still ached in places where old injuries never quite healed right. 15 years in the Marines will do that to you. 3 tours overseas, countless missions he couldn't talk about, and memories that visited him in the quiet hours of the night. But today wasn't about any of that. Today was about his son, David. He walked to the closet and pulled out his dress blues. The uniform hung there, perfectly pressed, waiting for this moment. Thomas had taken it to the dry cleaners twice just to make sure everything was perfect. The medals on the chest caught the early morning light streaming through the window. Each one told a story. Each one represented a sacrifice. But none of them mattered as much as being here today, in one piece, able to watch his boy walk across that stage. His wife, Patricia, stirred and smiled when she saw him holding the uniform. "You're really doing it," she said softly, wearing the full dress blues. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Thomas replied. "David deserves to see his old man looking sharp." The truth was, David deserved so much more than that. He deserved all the birthdays Thomas had missed, all the baseball games he couldn't attend because he was halfway across the world, all the school plays and parent-teacher conferences that Patricia had to go to alone. David never complained, not once. He just kept studying, kept working hard, kept making them proud. And now he was graduating top of his class with a full scholarship to college. Thomas showered and started getting ready, taking his time with each button, each medal, each detail. The uniform had to be perfect. Everything had to be perfect. This was David's day, and nothing was going to ruin it. Patricia made breakfast, but Thomas could barely eat. His stomach was doing flips like he was preparing for a mission. He kept checking the time, even though they had hours before the ceremony started. David came downstairs in his cap and gown, looking nervous himself. "How do I look?" David asked, adjusting his cap for the 10th time. "Like a graduate," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to hide. "Like a young man who's about to change the world." David smiled, that same smile he'd had since he was a little kid. "Thanks for being here, Dad. I know it means a lot to you, but it means everything to me." Those words hit Thomas harder than any combat situation ever had. He pulled his son into a hug, this young man who was taller than him now, stronger than him in ways that had nothing to do with muscle. "I wouldn't be anywhere else," Thomas whispered. They arrived at Lincoln High School an hour early. The parking lot was already filling up with cars, families streaming toward the auditorium with flowers and cameras. Thomas checked his ticket for the 3rd time. Section C, row 7, seat 12, reserved for military families. The school had a special section for veterans and active service members, a way to honor those who served. Thomas appreciated that. It felt good to be recognized even in this small way. The auditorium was massive, capable of seating over 1,000 people. Decorations in the school colors hung from every surface. A stage at the front held rows of chairs for the graduates and a podium for the speakers. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Parents chatted with each other. Grandparents claimed the best spots. Younger siblings ran around despite being told to sit still. Thomas made his way to his assigned seat. Section C was on the left side, about halfway back. Perfect view of the stage. He could see everything from here. The seat next to him was empty. Patricia would sit there once David joined the other graduates for their pre-ceremony lineup. Other veterans were scattered throughout the section. Thomas recognized a few from local veteran events. They nodded to each other, that unspoken acknowledgement that passes between those who've served. He settled into his seat and watched the auditorium fill up. Every few minutes, another graduate would peek out from behind the stage curtains, trying to spot their family in the crowd. Thomas kept his eyes on that curtain, waiting for David to appear. When he finally did, their eyes locked across the distance. David's face broke into a huge grin, and he gave his father a quick thumbs up. Thomas felt his chest tighten with pride. The ceremony was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. At 9:45, the lights dimmed slightly, and an administrator asked everyone to take their seats. The chatter died down to a low murmur. Parents pulled out their phones and cameras, ready to capture every moment. Thomas sat up straighter in his uniform, hands folded in his lap, waiting. Music started playing, something classical and dignified. The graduates began filing in from both sides of the stage, a river of blue caps and gowns. Thomas's eyes found David immediately, third row from the front. He walked with confidence, head held high, and when he took his seat on stage, he looked out at the crowd again, finding his father in the military section. The principal stepped up to the microphone and welcomed everyone. He talked about the journey these students had taken, the challenges they'd overcome, the bright futures ahead of them. Thomas heard the words, but his attention kept drifting to David, memorizing every detail of this moment. This was what he'd fought for. This was what all those long deployments had been about. Creating a country, a community, a life where his son could thrive. The valedictorian gave a speech about dreams and determination. A local community leader talked about responsibility and giving back. Through it all, Thomas sat perfectly still, the model of military discipline, even though inside his heart was racing. Soon they'd start calling names. Soon he'd watch his son walk across that stage. Soon David would hold that diploma in his hands, the first person in their family to graduate with college already lined up. Thomas thought about his own father, who'd worked in a factory his whole life. He thought about the sacrifices his parents had made so he could join the military, so he could build a better life. And now here was David, about to soar even higher. That's how it should be, Thomas thought, each generation reaching a little further, climbing a little higher. The principal announced they were about to begin calling names. Thomas leaned forward slightly, not wanting to miss a single second. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat. Around him, other parents were doing the same thing, all of them caught in this moment of anticipation and pride. This was it. This was what mattered. Not the medals on his chest or the battles he'd fought. This moment right here, being present for his son, being the father David deserved. Thomas had made it home. He was here. He was whole. And he was about to watch his boy achieve something extraordinary. The first name was called, and the ceremony truly began. Thomas watched each graduate walk across the stage, his anticipation building. David's name would come soon. Everything was perfect. Everything was going exactly as planned. He had no idea that in just a few minutes his perfect day was about to be shattered. He had no idea that the uniform he wore so proudly, the service he'd given so faithfully, was about to become the center of an incident that would test everything he believed about honor, dignity, and what it really means to stand up for what's right. But for now, in this moment, Thomas Williams was just a father watching graduates walk across a stage, waiting for his son's name to be called, believing that nothing could ruin this perfect day. The ceremony had been going smoothly for about 30 minutes when Thomas first noticed someone watching him. It was subtle at first, just a feeling of eyes on him from somewhere to his right. He glanced over and saw two security guards standing near the wall, one older with gray hair and a thick neck, the other younger and fidgety. They seemed to be looking in his direction, then talking to each other in low voices. Thomas pushed the thought aside. They were probably just doing their job, scanning the crowd, making sure everything stayed orderly. He turned his attention back to the stage where another graduate was receiving their diploma. The crowd applauded. Parents cheered. The ceremony continued, but the feeling didn't go away. A few minutes later, Thomas looked over again. The guards were definitely staring at him now. The older one pointed in his direction and said something to his partner. The younger guard nodded, and they both started walking along the side of the auditorium, coming closer to Thomas's section. Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He double-checked his ticket still in his hand. Section C, row 7, seat 12, that's exactly where he was sitting. Everything was in order. Maybe they were coming to talk to someone else. The guards reached his row and stopped. The younger one leaned down, getting close to Thomas's ear. "Sir, we need you to come with us," he whispered. Thomas looked up at him, confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "You need to come with us now." The guard's voice was still quiet, but firmer this time. "Is there a problem?" Thomas kept his voice low, aware that the ceremony was still going on, not wanting to cause a scene. "We'll discuss it outside. Please come with us." Thomas felt his heart rate pick up. This didn't make sense. "I have a ticket. I'm in my assigned seat. My son is about to graduate." The older guard stepped closer now, his bulk blocking Thomas's view of the stage. "These seats are reserved," he said, his voice not quite as quiet as his partner's. A few people in nearby seats were starting to notice. "I know they're reserved. Thomas said, working hard to keep his voice calm and respectful, reserved for military families. I'm military, see? He gestured to his uniform, the medals, everything that should have made this obvious. We received a complaint, the older guard said. You're in the wrong section. We need you to move. Thomas felt heat rising in his face. A complaint? From who? About what? He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Can I see someone in charge? There's been a mistake. The mistake is you not cooperating, the older guard said, his voice rising above the level of the ceremony now. Several heads turned. The principal paused mid-sentence at the podium, looking toward the disturbance. Thomas's military training kicked in. Stay calm, don't escalate. Follow the chain of command. But inside he felt humiliation burning through him. I have my ticket right here, he said again, holding it up. I'm not trying to cause any problems. I just want to watch my son graduate. Sir, these seats are for military families only, the younger guard said, as if Thomas hadn't already explained that he was military. As if his uniform wasn't making that crystal clear. That's when it hit Thomas. They could see his uniform. They could see his medals. They knew he was military, but they were still trying to remove him. The realization settled over him like ice water. This wasn't about his seat. This wasn't about a ticket. This was about something else entirely. I am military, Thomas said slowly, clearly, making eye contact with both guards. 15 years. Marine Corps, 3 tours. I have every right to be in this seat. We're going to need you to come with us or we'll have to call the police, the older guard said, loud enough now that everyone in the surrounding sections could hear. The ceremony had essentially stopped. The principal stood at the podium, uncertain what to do. All the graduates on stage were watching. Thomas could see David sitting in the 3rd row, his face a mixture of confusion and horror. Their eyes met across the distance, and Thomas saw his son start to stand up, as if he might leave his seat and come to his father's defense. Thomas gave David a tiny shake of his head. Stay there. Don't ruin your moment. But inside, Thomas's heart was breaking. This was supposed to be David's day, his perfect day, and now it was turning into something ugly and wrong. Please, Thomas said, and he hated how his voice sounded, hated that he was being reduced to begging. My son is graduating. I have a ticket. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're causing a disturbance, the older guard said. You need to leave now. Other people in the military section were starting to react. A woman behind Thomas spoke up. He has every right to be here. Leave him alone. An older veteran across the aisle stood up. That man is in uniform. What's your problem? But the guards weren't backing down. If anything, they seemed more determined. The younger one reached out as if to take Thomas's arm to physically escort him out. Thomas pulled away, not roughly, just moving his arm out of reach. Don't touch me, he said quietly. He wasn't going to let this get physical. He wasn't going to give them an excuse to call him aggressive or dangerous. Sir, you're being asked to leave. If you don't comply, we will remove you. Thomas looked at the stage again, at David, who was now standing, clearly torn between staying with his class and running to his father. At all the other graduates watching this scene unfold, at the parents who'd gone silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. He thought about just leaving, just walking out to avoid making this worse. But something inside him refused. He'd served his country. He'd earned the right to be here. He'd fought for freedom, for justice, for the idea that everyone deserves equal treatment. And now in his own community, at his own son's graduation, he was being singled out and humiliated for no reason he could understand except the one reason he didn't want to believe. I'm not leaving, Thomas said quietly but firmly. I have done nothing wrong. I have a right to be here. The older guard's face turned red. Fine, we'll have you arrested for trespassing. Trespassing? Thomas almost laughed at the absurdity. I have a ticket. I was invited. I'm in my assigned seat. A voice from behind Thomas called out, Someone film this. Several phones came up around the auditorium. The younger guard noticed and looked nervous, but the older one seemed past caring. Thomas remained seated, hands visible, non-threatening, but absolutely not moving. He'd faced down enemy fire. He'd survived situations these guards couldn't imagine. He wasn't going to be bullied out of his son's graduation. The tension in the auditorium was thick enough to cut. Parents whispered to each other. The principal seemed frozen, unsure how to handle this. The graduates sat in confused silence, and Thomas just sat there in his dress blues, medals catching the light, a decorated veteran being treated like a criminal in front of his son and his entire community. He didn't know it yet, but help was coming. 6 men scattered throughout the auditorium had noticed what was happening. 6 men who knew exactly what that uniform meant, who understood the significance of those medals, who recognized a brother being treated unjustly. They were already moving, already planning, already preparing to stand up for someone who'd stood up for his country. But in that moment, Thomas just felt alone. He felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. He felt the injustice of it burning in his chest, and he felt his son watching from the stage, watching his father be humiliated on what should have been the proudest day of both their lives. The older guard reached for his radio, presumably to call for backup or the police. Thomas took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever came next. He'd been in worse situations. He'd faced worse enemies. But none of that had hurt quite like this. None of that had happened in front of his son. The auditorium held its breath. The graduates watched. David stood frozen in his row, his graduation gown wrinkled from gripping the fabric. Patricia, who'd been backstage helping coordinate the graduates, emerged from the side door and saw the scene unfolding, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Thomas sat perfectly still, back straight, eyes forward, every inch the Marine he'd always been. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. He wouldn't let David see him lose his composure. Whatever happened next, he would face it with dignity. But inside, a question burned. How did it come to this? How did serving his country, wearing his uniform with pride and sitting in his assigned seat to watch his son graduate turn into this nightmare? What had he done wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong skin? The older guard spoke into his radio. The younger one shifted nervously from foot to foot. The crowd murmured. And Thomas waited, his jaw set, his resolve firm, refusing to be moved unless they literally carried him out. His son's graduation was falling apart. The perfect day had shattered. And for what? For nothing that made any sense. For nothing that was fair or right or just. But Thomas Williams was a Marine. And Marines don't retreat. They don't surrender. They hold their ground, even when the odds are against them, even when the fight seems impossible. So he sat there and waited for whatever came next, not knowing that in just moments, 6 warriors would step forward to stand beside him. The first person to move was sitting 10 rows back. Lieutenant Commander Richard Hayes had been watching the entire situation unfold with growing anger. He'd served with Thomas Williams during a joint operation in Afghanistan 6 years ago. When Hayes saw his old friend being harassed by security guards, something inside him snapped. He stood up slowly, his Navy dress uniform just as impressive as Thomas's Marine blues. The woman sitting next to him, his wife, grabbed his hand. "Rich, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done 2 minutes ago," he replied quietly, then started making his way toward the aisle. On the opposite side of the auditorium, Daniel Cruz saw Hayes stand up and immediately understood. Cruz had also been part of that operation in Afghanistan. The 3 of them, Hayes, Cruz, and Thomas, had spent 72 hours pinned down in hostile territory, relying on each other to survive. "You don't forget brothers like that." Cruz tapped the shoulder of the man sitting next to him. "That's my friend down there. I need to get through." "Go," the man said, standing up to let him pass. 4 other Navy SEALs scattered throughout the crowd, all noticed the same thing at roughly the same time. They'd all come here today, coordinating in secret, planning to surprise Thomas and honor his son's graduation. They'd served together, fought together, and now they were all watching one of their own being disrespected. Kyle Morrison was near the back. Stephen Park was on the left side, 3 sections over. Anthony Chen was close to the front, just across from the military section. And Jack Thompson had been standing near the exit, getting some air because the auditorium was warm. All of them started moving at once, converging on the scene with the practiced precision of men who'd run countless operations together. They didn't rush. They didn't run. They simply walked with purpose, with confidence, with the kind of presence that comes from years of training and combat experience. People noticed. The crowd parted for them without being asked. Something about the way they moved, the way they carried themselves, made it clear these were not ordinary men. Hayes reached Thomas first. He stepped into the aisle and positioned himself between Thomas and the security guards. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was calm, polite even. but there was steel underneath. The older guard looked at Hayes, taking in the Navy uniform, the insignia, the bearing. "This doesn't concern you. Please return to your seat." "Actually, it does concern me." Hayes gestured to Thomas. "This is a fellow service member, a decorated Marine, and unless I'm mistaken, he's sitting in his assigned seat in the military family section. So I'll ask again, what's the problem?" Cruz arrived next, taking up position on Hayes's right. Then Morrison from the back. Then Park from the left. One by one, the 6 SEALs formed a semicircle around Thomas, a wall of navy dress blues standing between him and the guards. The auditorium went completely silent. Even the whispers stopped. Everyone was watching now, phones out, recording everything. The younger security guard took a step back. His face had gone pale. He clearly hadn't signed up for this. But the older guard held his ground, though something in his eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I don't care how many uniforms show up. This man was reported for being in the wrong section. He needs to move." "Reported by who?" Chen asked, his voice sharp. "And why would anyone report a Marine in dress blues sitting in the military family section? That doesn't make sense. I don't have to explain our security procedures to you." "Actually," Hayes said, pulling out his phone, "I think you do, because what I'm seeing here looks an awful lot like discrimination. And that's not just wrong, it's illegal." Thompson, who'd been hanging back slightly, spoke up. "We all have the same tickets. We're all military. We're all in this section. So why are you only trying to remove him?" He let the question hang in the air, making the implication crystal clear without saying it directly. The older guard's face flushed red. There was a complaint from another attendee. They said this section was for military families and he shouldn't be here. "He's wearing a Marine Corps uniform," Park said, his tone incredulous. "With a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a Navy Cross. What about that says he's not military?" The younger guard found his voice, though it shook slightly. "Maybe the uniform isn't real. People buy these things online sometimes. That was the wrong thing to say." Morrison stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Are you seriously suggesting that this man is impersonating a Marine? Do you understand how offensive that is? Do you have any idea what it takes to earn these medals?" Hayes held up a hand, keeping things from escalating. "Look, let's make this simple. I served with this man. We all did." He gestured to the other 5 SEALs. "We can personally vouch for his service, his character, and his right to be here. So either you explain what's really going on, or you back off and let this man watch his son graduate." The principal, who'd been frozen at the podium this entire time, finally found his voice. "Gentlemen security, perhaps we can discuss this after the ceremony. We have graduates waiting." "No," Thomas said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He'd been silent through all of this, letting his brothers fight for him, but now he stood up. "No, we need to discuss this now, because my son is up on that stage watching his father be treated like a criminal, for no reason, except sitting in his assigned seat. And every graduate up there, every parent down here, they're all watching too. They're all learning a lesson right now about how veterans are treated, about how some people are treated. So no, we're not waiting until after." The auditorium erupted in applause. It started with the veterans in the military section, then spread throughout the crowd. People stood up clapping, showing their support. The guards looked around, suddenly aware that they'd lost the room, lost any authority they might have had. An older man in an army uniform, seated several rows behind Thomas, stood up. "I'm Colonel Raymond Mitchell, retired, and I'm appalled at what I'm witnessing. That Marine has earned his place here 1,000 times over." More veterans started standing, identifying themselves, adding their voices. A woman with a navy blazer stood up. "My son died in Afghanistan serving this country, and you want to kick out a fellow veteran for sitting in the military section? Shame on you." The older guard's radio crackled. A voice came through, someone from the main office. "Security, what's your status?" "We're getting calls about an incident." The guard lifted the radio but seemed unsure what to say. "How do you explain this? How do you justify trying to remove a decorated veteran from his son's graduation?" Hayes leaned in close to the guard, speaking quietly enough that only those nearby could hear. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to this Marine. You're going to return to your post, and you're going to let this ceremony continue, because if you don't, if you push this any further, every single person in this auditorium is going to know that you tried to remove a black veteran from his son's graduation, for no legitimate reason. And that video is going to be everywhere by tonight. The guard's eyes widened. Hayes had said the quiet part out loud, named the thing everyone had been thinking but not saying. The racial element that had been obvious from the start, but that everyone had been dancing around. That's not what this is about, the guard protested weakly. Then what is it about? Cruz challenged. Because from where we're standing it looks exactly like that. A black Marine in his assigned seat being harassed while every other person in this section, who happens to be white, gets left alone. What else are we supposed to think? The younger guard was backing away now, clearly done with this situation. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he mumbled. We can sort this out later. But Hayes wasn't letting them off that easy. No misunderstanding. You targeted this man. You tried to humiliate him in front of his son and his community. You owe him an apology. The older guard looked around at the 6 SEALs surrounding him, at the hundreds of people watching, at the phones recording everything, and finally at Thomas standing tall in his dress blues, dignified despite everything that had happened. I apologize, he muttered, the words barely audible. Louder, Morrison said. So everyone can hear. The guard cleared his throat. I apologize for the confusion. It wasn't a real apology, wasn't heartfelt, but it was something. Hayes turned to the principal. I think we're done here. Unless you have something to add? The principal hurried down from the stage, visibly sweating. Mr. Williams, I am so incredibly sorry. This should never have happened. Please, I would like to personally invite you to sit in a place of honor for the remainder of the ceremony. Thomas shook his head. I appreciate that, but I just want to sit in my assigned seat and watch my son graduate. That's all I've ever wanted. Of course, the principal stammered. He turned to the security guards. Return to your posts. We'll discuss this in my office immediately after the ceremony. The guards left, the older one's face still red with anger or embarrassment or both. As they walked away, the auditorium burst into applause again. Thomas sat back down in his seat, and the 6 SEALs took positions around him. Some sitting in empty seats nearby, others standing along the wall. Hayes sat down next to Thomas. You okay, brother? Thomas nodded, but his jaw was tight. I can't believe that just happened. I can, Cruz said from behind them. Doesn't make it right, but I can believe it. The principal returned to the podium and cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the ceremony. I apologize for that interruption. Let us continue with this celebration of our graduates' achievements. But the mood had shifted. Everyone in that auditorium had just witnessed something they wouldn't forget. The graduates on stage whispered to each other. Parents looked at each other with expressions ranging from anger to sadness to discomfort. Thomas looked up at David, who was still standing in his row, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of sadness, Thomas realized, but tears of something else. Pride maybe, or anger, or just the overwhelming emotion of watching his father stand his ground. Watching strangers become allies, watching a wrong being confronted in real time. Thomas gave his son a thumbs up, trying to convey that he was okay, that everything was okay. David nodded and slowly sat back down. The principal tried to restart the ceremony, his voice shaking slightly as he returned to the microphone. As I was saying before, each of these graduates has worked incredibly hard. Let us continue celebrating their achievements. But nobody was really focused on the ceremony anymore. The energy in the room had completely changed. Parents whispered to each other. Graduates kept glancing at Thomas and the 6 men in Navy uniforms surrounding him. The moment had been broken and there was no putting it back together. Thomas sat rigid in his seat, hands clasped in front of him, trying to focus on why he was here. David. This was about David. He forced himself to look at the stage, to pay attention as the principal continued calling names. But his mind was spinning, replaying everything that had just happened, feeling the shame and anger and confusion all mixed together. Hayes leaned over and spoke quietly. They'll try to cover this up, you know. Make it go away. You need to decide how you want to handle it. Thomas nodded but didn't respond. He didn't want to think about that right now. He just wanted to watch his son graduate. More names were called. More students walked across the stage to receive their diplomas. The ceremony dragged on, but Thomas could feel the tension in the air. People kept looking at him, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some with expressions he couldn't quite read. Behind him, Other veterans in the military section were having quiet conversations. Colonel Mitchell was talking to someone on his phone, keeping his voice low but clearly upset. A Navy officer 2 rows back was typing furiously on her phone, probably documenting everything while it was fresh. The woman who'd spoken up earlier about her son dying in Afghanistan caught Thomas's eye. She gave him a small nod, a gesture of solidarity. Thomas nodded back, grateful for these strangers who'd stood up for him even though they didn't know him. Chen, one of the SEALs, had positioned himself near the wall where the security guards had been standing. He kept glancing toward the exits, making sure they didn't come back, that they didn't try again. Morrison did the same from the other side. They'd formed a protective perimeter without being obvious about it. Professional even in this civilian setting. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the principal said the words Thomas had been waiting for. David Arthur Williams. Thomas stood up without thinking, his hands coming together in applause before his son had even left his seat. David walked across the stage and Thomas could see his son was trying to hold it together, trying not to cry. The principal shook David's hand and gave him his diploma, but David barely looked at it. His eyes were locked on his father. The applause for David was thunderous. It started with Thomas and the 6 SEALs, but then the entire military section joined in. Then it spread through the whole auditorium. People were standing, clapping, cheering, not just for David's achievement, but for what they'd all just witnessed. They were applauding the father as much as the son. David held up his diploma, and even from this distance, Thomas could see the tears streaming down his son's face. It was supposed to be a moment of pure joy, and it was, but it was also tinged with something else. The innocence of the day had been stolen. The perfection had been shattered, and no amount of applause could change that. After David returned to his seat, Thomas sat back down. His legs felt weak. Hayes put a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture of support that meant everything in that moment. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. More names were called. More students graduated. Finally, the principal announced that the class of 2025 had officially graduated, and the students threw their caps in the air. The auditorium erupted in cheers and celebration. But before anyone could leave, before the crowd could start filing out, something unexpected happened. David stepped away from his classmates and walked to the microphone. The principal looked confused but stepped aside. The other graduates quieted down, curious. David's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "I know we're supposed to just celebrate right now, but I need to say something." He paused, looking out at the crowd, then directly at his father. "A lot of you saw what happened earlier. What almost happened. My dad is a Marine. He served 3 tours overseas. He's been shot at, almost killed. Seen things I can't even imagine. And today he almost didn't get to see me graduate because 2 security guards decided he didn't belong here." The auditorium went silent again. Parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. The principal looked like he wanted to stop this but didn't dare. "My dad taught me a lot of things," David continued, his voice growing stronger. "He taught me about honor, about dignity, about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. And today he showed me something else. He showed me what it means to keep your composure when people treat you unfairly. He showed me grace under pressure. And he showed me that sometimes strangers become brothers when they see injustice happening." David looked at the 6 SEALs standing around his father. "Thank you to those men who stood up for my dad. I don't know who you are, but thank you. And to everyone in this room, I want you to know that my father earned his place here 1,000 times over. He didn't just earn it by buying a ticket. He earned it by serving his country, by sacrificing for all of us, by being a good man and a good father." Thomas felt tears running down his face now, not caring who saw. This was his son. This brave young man speaking truth in front of hundreds of people, refusing to let the moment pass without acknowledgement. "I'm grateful to be graduating today," David said, "but I'm even more grateful that my dad is here to see it, that he made it home from his deployments, that he's alive and healthy and sitting right there in Section C, Row 7, exactly where he belongs. So when you all go home tonight and post your pictures and tell your stories about today, I hope you'll remember what happened here. I hope you'll remember that words like honor and service and sacrifice aren't just abstract concepts. They're real. They're my dad. They're all the veterans in this room, and they deserve better than what happened today. The applause started slowly, just a few people, then built like a wave. People stood up again. The veterans were clapping the hardest, many of them with tears in their eyes too. The graduates on stage joined in, applauding their classmate for his courage in speaking up. David stepped away from the microphone and walked off the stage. He didn't return to his classmates. He walked straight down the center aisle to his father. Thomas met him halfway and they embraced in the middle of the auditorium while everyone watched and applauded. "I'm sorry, Dad," David whispered. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Don't be sorry," Thomas said, holding his son tight. "You just made me the proudest father in this room." Patricia found them then, having left her position backstage. She threw her arms around both of them, the three of them standing there in the aisle while the ceremony officially ended and people started gathering their things. The 6 SEALs approached, and Thomas finally got a good look at all of them together. His old friends, his brothers. "How did you all even know to be here?" he asked. Hayes grinned. "You think we'd miss your kid's graduation? We've been planning this for months. Was supposed to be a surprise. Show up and cheer when David's name was called. Didn't quite go as planned." "Went better than planned," Cruz said. "We got to remind some people what service means, what brotherhood means." They stood there talking, sharing stories, while around them the auditorium slowly emptied. Other veterans stopped by to shake Thomas's hand, to share their own stories, to offer support. Colonel Mitchell gave Thomas his card and said to call him if there were any repercussions, that he'd personally make sure this incident was properly documented and addressed. The principal approached nervously, wringing his hands. "Mr. Williams, I cannot apologize enough. This is not who we are as a school. I want to assure you that this will be thoroughly investigated. Those security guards will face consequences." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "What I want is for this to never happen to anyone else. Not just in your school, but anywhere. Veterans shouldn't have to prove they belong. Nobody should. Absolutely. I completely agree. We're going to implement mandatory training, review all our security protocols, make sure this never happens again." "See that you do," Hayes said, his voice carrying that command authority that made people listen, "because we'll be following up. All of us." The principal nodded vigorously and hurried away, probably to deal with the crisis that was already brewing. Thomas could see him on his phone talking rapidly to someone, likely the superintendent or the school board. As they finally started to leave, heading toward the exits, people kept stopping them. Parents wanted to express their support. Teachers wanted to apologize on behalf of the school. Students wanted to shake David's hand and tell him how brave he was. It took nearly an hour to actually leave the building. By the time they reached the parking lot, the sun was high in the sky, beating down on the asphalt. Thomas's uniform was soaked with sweat, but he didn't care. The 6 SEALs walked them to their car. "You guys have plans now?" Cruz asked. "Because we were thinking we could all grab some food, celebrate properly." "I think we'd like that," Patricia said, speaking up for the first time in a while. "I think we'd all like that." They agreed on a restaurant, planning to meet there in 30 minutes. As the SEALs walked to their own vehicles, Thomas stood by his car with his wife and son, just breathing, just processing everything that had happened. "You okay?" Patricia asked softly. "No," Thomas admitted, "but I will be." David looked at his father. "I meant what I said in there, about you showing me grace under pressure." Thomas pulled his son close one more time. "You showed me something too. You showed me courage. Standing up there, saying what needed to be said. That took guts." They got in the car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield, they could see other families leaving, celebrating, taking pictures. For most of them, this had been a perfect day. The restaurant they chose was a local place called Murphy's, known for its comfort food and big portions. When Thomas, Patricia, and David arrived, the 6 SEALs were already there, having pushed 3 tables together to accommodate everyone. They'd picked a corner spot, partly out of habit from years of tactical awareness, partly to give the group some privacy. As they settled in and ordered food, the conversation started light. Stories from old deployments, jokes about the Marine Corps versus the Navy. David listened, fascinated by these men who'd served with his father, who'd been through things he could only imagine. But eventually, the conversation turned to what had happened at the graduation. It was impossible to avoid. "I keep thinking about that guard's face," Morrison said, shaking his head. When he realized he'd messed up, when he saw all of us standing there, he knew. You could see it in his eyes. He knew before that, Park said. He knew the whole time. That's what makes it worse. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Thomas had been quiet, mostly listening, but now he spoke up. I've been trying to understand it, trying to figure out what I did wrong, and I keep coming back to the same answer, nothing. I did nothing wrong. Exactly, Hayes said. You existed in a space where someone decided you didn't belong. That's all it takes sometimes. Patricia reached over and took Thomas's hand. I was backstage when it started. Someone came and told me there was an incident, that my husband was being removed. I ran out there thinking something terrible had happened. And it had, just not the way I expected. How's David handling it? Chen asked, glancing at the young man who'd stepped outside to take a phone call. Better than I expected, Patricia said, but I worry about what this taught him, about what lesson he's taking from today. Maybe the lesson isn't as bad as you think, Cruz suggested. He saw his father stand his ground. He saw people come together to fight injustice. He saw that speaking truth matters. Those are good lessons. David came back inside, his phone still in his hand. That was my friend Tyler. He says the video is everywhere. Someone posted it online and it's already been shared thousands of times. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Video. Of the whole thing. The guards trying to remove you. The SEALs standing up. My speech, everything. David sat down and pulled up his phone, showing them. Sure enough, there were multiple videos from different angles, all showing the confrontation at the graduation. Thomas watched himself on the screen, sitting there in his uniform, staying calm while the guards demanded he leave. He watched Hayes and the others form that protective circle. He watched the crowd start to react. It was surreal seeing the moment from outside himself. Look at the comments, David said, scrolling down. There were thousands already. Most of them were supportive, people expressing outrage at how Thomas had been treated, praising the SEALs for stepping in, calling for the guards to be fired. But some of the comments made Thomas's jaw tighten. People saying it must have been a misunderstanding. People saying maybe Thomas had done something to provoke it. People finding ways to justify what happened or minimize it. Don't read those, Hayes said firmly. Seriously, don't torture yourself with the opinions of people who weren't there and don't understand. But Thomas couldn't look away. He kept scrolling, kept reading, seeing his own experience being debated and dissected by strangers. Some calling him a hero, some questioning whether the whole thing was staged. The internet had a way of taking real human pain and turning it into entertainment, into content, into just another thing to argue about. The school district released a statement, Patricia said, pulling it up on her own phone. She read it aloud. We are aware of an incident that occurred at today's graduation ceremony at Lincoln High School. We take these matters seriously and are conducting a full investigation. The behavior displayed does not reflect our values or our commitment to honoring all veterans and military families. We will be implementing additional training and reviewing our security protocols. That's it? Morrison scoffed. That's their response? It's a start, Thomas said tiredly. More than I expected, honestly. The food arrived and they ate, though Thomas had little appetite. His mind kept drifting back to the auditorium, to that moment when he realized what was happening, when he understood that his uniform and his service didn't protect him from being seen as someone who didn't belong. Can I ask you something? David said suddenly, looking at his father. Did you ever face stuff like this before? In the military? Thomas considered the question carefully. The military has its problems. It's not perfect. But mostly, when you're wearing the uniform, people respect it. There's a code, brotherhood. It doesn't matter what you look like when bullets are flying. What matters is whether you can be counted on. But outside the military, David pressed. Thomas nodded slowly. Yeah, outside it's different. I've been followed in stores. Had people cross the street to avoid me. Had cops pull me over for driving through nice neighborhoods. But I always thought, maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe I'm reading into things. Today, though, there was no maybe. It was right there in front of everyone. I never knew, David said quietly. You never told me about that stuff. I didn't want you to grow up angry, Thomas said. Or scared. I wanted you to grow up believing in the good things. Injustice and equality and all the ideals I fought for. I didn't want to burden you with the reality of how things actually are sometimes. Patricia squeezed Thomas's hand. But he saw it today anyway. We all did. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Hayes said. Not the incident itself, obviously. That was wrong on every level. But David seeing it, seeing how people responded, seeing his dad handle it with dignity, that's powerful. That's real. Thompson, who'd been mostly quiet throughout the meal, finally spoke up. My dad was Navy. Black man, served in Vietnam. He used to tell me stories about coming home still in uniform and getting spit on at the airport. Not because he was military, but because of what he looked like. He said the uniform didn't protect him then, and sometimes it still doesn't. That's the part that gets me, Park said. Thomas was literally wearing the proof of his service. The medals, the insignia, everything. And it didn't matter. Someone still decided he didn't belong. That someone needs to be held accountable, Chen said firmly. The guards, yes, but also whoever made that complaint. Whoever decided to call security in the first place. The school says they're investigating, Patricia said. But what does that mean, really? Will anything actually change? The conversation continued, circling around anger and frustration and the bigger questions about justice and change and what any of this meant. Other diners in the restaurant kept glancing over at their table, at the group of men in military uniforms. Some people smiled and nodded respectfully. Others quickly looked away. As they finished eating and prepared to leave, Hayes stood up and raised his glass of water. I want to say something. Thomas, you're one of the best men I've ever served with. What happened today was wrong. But the way you handled it, the way you kept your composure, the way you refused to let them break you, that was everything the Marine Corps teaches. Everything we value. You showed more courage sitting in that seat than most people show in a lifetime. The others raised their glasses in agreement. David raised his too, looking at his father with an expression that mixed pride and sadness and love. And David, Hayes continued, what you did speaking up like that, telling the truth in front of everyone, that took guts. You honored your father and you honored all of us who've served. You should be proud. They all drank to that. A simple gesture that somehow made Thomas feel a little less alone, a little less wounded by what had happened. Outside the restaurant, as they were saying their goodbyes, Colonel Mitchell called Thomas. I wanted you to know, the retired colonel said. I've been in touch with some people. The local veterans organization is planning to file a formal complaint. The State Veterans Affairs Office has been notified. This isn't just going to disappear. I appreciate that, Thomas said. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to be the face of some big campaign. I just wanted to watch my son graduate. I understand. But sometimes these things are bigger than what we want. Sometimes they're about making sure it doesn't happen to the next person. Think about it. After the call ended, Thomas stood in the parking lot with his family and his friends, the evening sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. This should have been a simple day. A good day. A perfect day. And in some ways it had been. David had graduated. Thomas had been there to see it. They were all safe and healthy and together. But something had been lost too. Some innocence. Some faith in the idea that service and sacrifice would always be respected. Some belief that things had gotten better, that progress was real, that the fights of previous generations had been won. What are you thinking about? Patricia asked, seeing the look on his face. I'm thinking about all the people who don't have 6 SEALs to stand up for them, Thomas said. All the people who face this kind of thing every day. In smaller ways, quieter ways, without witnesses or video or anyone to help. I'm thinking about how lucky I was, even though what happened was terrible. Because at least people saw it. At least there were consequences, or will be. Most people don't even get that. David hugged his father tight. I'm sorry your day got ruined. It didn't get ruined, Thomas said, and he meant it. It got complicated. But look at what came out of it. People saw what happened and they cared. They stood up. They spoke out. Your speech moved people. The video is making people think. Maybe something good comes from this.